So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I had a pretty international upbringing. I was born in India. I grew up in Africa part of my childhood, and then in the States now for the past 25 years. Career-wise too, I had a diversity of experiences from being an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I was part of 2 startups, from being one of the 2 founders with no funding, in that quintessential bad office behind a railroad track, to being at really large companies like Walmart and PepsiCo now for the past 4 years.
And what connects all of that? Do tell.
I think what connects all of that is, I think, big opportunities, I would say. You kind of see what the future could be like, and then you work backwards and say, how do I go solve that? How do I get the right people and the right culture and the right, resources and mix of things to kind of go solve that? I have this thought experiment that I do, and this is something that I would counsel anyone who tries to go into a transformation role in a big company to do, is that you kind of have to act consistent with the fact that you're willing to walk out the next day. When we recruit people, I inherently am biased towards people who have had some entrepreneurial background in their journey because they are highly likely to be successful in our environment. I want to see people who are unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom, and who have taken risks in their career, who have taken risks in their lives, who are not intimidated by hierarchy.
Do you think chief digital officers need to come from the industry, or?
Again, I think it probably depends on the individual, but I actually don't, we now have a leadership team of over 100 years of native tech and e-commerce experience on my leadership team. That didn't exist 3.5, 4 years ago when I showed up at PepsiCo. And I'll tell you, none of the people that have that native experience came from the CPG industry. Because in fact, I think if you put industry experience, I think you're constraining yourself as a requirement.
What is the greatest challenge you face to drive the progress that you envision in your role?
It's a bunch of things. I think part of it is, to convince a company that's incredibly successful that there's a burning platform. Mm-hmm. That's hard. Now the world is changing, and I think, I think there's generally more awareness. But even then, you'd be surprised, right? I mean, Walmart has almost a $500 billion business, or maybe more, and and e-commerce is still a very small percentage of that. So I think that's a big challenge. How do you build that sense of urgency? The other problem is cultural. I think when people use words like, agile and lean and everything else, it means something different to different people. I like to say that transformation is not putting a coat of paint. It's a gut renovation. Now, let's say you've done all of that. Now you have to convince people that, you would be able to attract to an Amazon or a Google or a startup to now come and solve this problem for you at PepsiCo, or name any company, right? And so how do you get the 10x talent to think of you as a destination? When I showed up at PepsiCo, at least, I wanted to create mission clarity for this team, and I wanted our lives, at least our compensation, to depend on what we did as a team. So we did that. Apparently, PepsiCo designed the first new comp plan they had in 25 years for this group.
So very often, the chief digital officer title is used.
Yeah.
What do you think is a proper and appropriate title for executives with this responsibility?
It's actually a very tricky question, because I'll tell you my personal bias. I actually, when I joined PepsiCo and they offered me a chief digital officer title, we were discussing titles, and I was like, I don't want a chief digital officer title. And I felt like if I didn't have some commercial responsibility, some operational, like a P&L, where we're proving this, you're just an ideas guy.